Hello friends, I hope you're doing very well indeed. It's March, which is the month that contains International Women's Day, so I thought for this video about the last few books I've been reading, it would be fun to explore books either by or about inspiring women. I've got 3 books to recommend to you. The first one I can't show physically for reasons I'll explain in a moment, but it's Melissa Grant's Playing the Whore. It's a book about sex work and sex workers, and I read it for the first time a few years ago, and I revisited it recently. It's a real eye-opener. The book is really accessible, there's some fantastic philosophical analysis in it. It includes the viewpoints and words of sex workers themselves, who are often, Grant demonstrates, excluded from that conversation, which is to say, the conversation about their lives. What Grant demonstrates is that sex workers exist at the crossroads of almost every single axis of oppression. It's not like a double whammy, it's not a triple whammy, it's like a multifaceted, megahedral whammy of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, imperialism. Weirdly, they've been used as pawns in imperialistic foreign policy. They get their wages stolen by the police, they get subject to police violence, they get xenophobia if they're migrant sex workers, they get the drudgeries of the gig economy, and to add to all of that, their experiences and their struggles and what they have to add philosophically and to a conversation about human rights has largely been excluded and is, in many ways, still largely excluded from all kinds of public discourse, even from feminist discourse. And so what she demonstrates is that the freedom of sex workers to live and do their job is pretty much quite a good litmus test for the freedom of everyone else. The book draws heavily on Laura Agustin's Sex at the Margins, which is about migrant sex work. I really recommend this one as well. I would say read Grant first, it's kind of slightly more accessible, a bit more of a general introduction, and then read Agustin on migrant sex work, because they're both brilliant and they feed into each other. The reason I can't show you this book is because I lent it to Hannah Witten, speaking of inspiring women, who has just had a bout of quite major surgery. So if you do have a couple of minutes after watching this, I know she'd really appreciate you going over to her channel. You can tell her I sent you, and wishing her a speedy recovery for that. Next up, a book that puts a big smile on my face. I can't show it to you because I've lent it to my mum, but it is Ashton Applewhite's This Chair Rocks. Full title, This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism, which more or less tells you what it's about. It's about ageism and how we value the lives of older people. She gives a lot of stats on stuff like healthcare, on stuff like housing policy, on stuff like employment figures, and how there is real systemic material discrimination there. Ashton Applewhite is a political activist from the United States. I had the distinct pleasure of hanging out with her a while ago. She even gave me a signed copy of this book. It's brilliant. Like Playing the Whore, it was a real eye-opener for me. If I had some curiosities, it might have been about how this kind of ageism came about, because Ashton does touch a little bit on how the way that we view older people has changed over time, but I might have liked to hear a little bit more about the history of that. You know, what was it like before the Industrial Revolution? She connects it back to how we value the ability to work in society, and also connects it to ableism, as you might expect. The book isn't just about ageism and economic and political oppression, it's also about myth-busting as well. There are some fantastic myths about older people in there that Ashton just blows wide open. For instance, she says that a lot of people worry that they will get dementia as they get older, but the number of people who actually get dementia is very, very small. And in fact, most older people just continue on and are fine for like most of their lives. It came at a very opportune time for me. My grandmother passed away in December, and so the family's mind, the collective family mind, has been on our older family members, and my own parents are nearing retirement. So it was a very, very good and opportune time for me to read a book and to think about just how many of my attitudes about older people, again, I had received uncritically and never really examined. The final chapter, again, because my grandmother passed away and sadly various other people have, is about death and how people view death, how people change the way they view death as they get older, which I found really very important for me. She advises, and I think this is a brilliant turn of phrase, she advises that we all become, whatever age, older people in training, and that we move towards a more compassionate, more fact-based, less fear-based view of aging as we get older, and acknowledge that to be aging is to be alive. This book presented me with some real opportunities to grow as a person and become more open and more compassionate, and for that I'm extremely grateful, and I am a little bit more proud of my white hairs now. There's 1 or 2 coming in. And I don't mind them so much having read this book. I'm actually quite proud. Last but not least, and I can show you this one, Silvia Federici's Caliban and the Witch. This is the wrong book! Silvia Federici's Caliban and the Witch. This is one of the best books I've read in absolutely bloody ages. It's about the witch hunts from the 15th to the 17th centuries, in which something like 200,000 or more, maybe, we don't know, women were murdered for the crime of witchcraft. If you've watched the show for some time, and very probably if you haven't watched the show and just kind of know about society and history, you will know that colonialism and slavery were very much foundational and necessary to the formation of capitalism. Federici's thesis is that the witch hunts were just as important as colonialism and slavery for making the world what it is today. What she demonstrates is that when people talk about the transition from feudalism to capitalism, that makes it sound very smooth, very natural, inevitable almost. But it was anything but. That period was an incredibly bloody and turbulent period of history, and there were all kinds of struggles against the new capitalist order that was forming. People were trying to throw out all kinds of new social systems and resist the foundation of capitalism in many, many ways. Critically, a lot of those rebellions and food riots and anti-enclosure riots were led by women. It was the women who would go down to the ships when there was grain sitting in the ships waiting to be exported, going to make a tidy profit, and there's people in the streets starving. The women went onto the ships and they stole the bloody grain and redistributed it to the people. Or when the local lord puts up a bunch of fences to fence off the common land and does the enclosure thing, which steals the common land from the people, the women went down there in the dead of night and kicked the bloody fences down. Meanwhile, a lot of people believe in magic. It's just a part of life. There's the local wise woman, who's usually the person who has a lot of social power, who handles a lot of the magical stuff, and what Federici demonstrates is that kind of magical thinking with lucky days and unlucky days and days being good to work and days not being good to work, and the ability to obtain power without working, which is the promise of magic, just did not work with the new capitalist order, which required people to work for long periods of time, to be regimented, to be predictable. Not to mention the fact that in the New World, in the colonies, a lot of the rebellions against the invaders were led by women. So, if you're part of the newly forming capitalist elite in Europe, your worst fear is that all the newly minted proletariat will bond together and kick your ass and stop you building capitalism, which is going to make you a whole lot of money. So what do? You have to break the power of women. You have to make the newly formed proletariat fight each other along gender lines rather than join together and kick your ass. How do you do that? You have a witch hunt. You invent the figure of the witch who comes to stand for the rebellious woman, basically. Throughout the witch hunts, it wasn't just women being rounded up and murdered. There was a massive attack on women's rights and on kind of human rights generally during that period, some of which is still being felt today. Stuff was criminalised during the witch hunts, which is still in large parts of the world criminalised today, or at least the parts in the world that are either Europe or touched and affected by Europe. So for instance, homosexuality wasn't criminalised before then, before the witch hunts. Contraception and abortion, such as they were in those days, were not criminalised. Abortion is still criminalised in parts of the world today, and it was the witch hunt that led to that change. Sex work, contraception, any kind of sex that wasn't strictly for procreation, all criminalised during this period as an attempt to break the social power of women, particularly over their own reproduction. I thought, oh, that's the way it's kind of always been throughout history, and only now we're starting to change that. Like, no. Women in the medieval era had more rights, comparatively, than women in the 17th century. They weren't necessarily the equal of men, but the idea that they had to remain in the home all the time and couldn't be paid wages and just had to be sort of housewives, that came later and was imposed on top of it. Some of the absolutely fascinating bits of this book as well are the bits where she talks about how this fits into the kind of rationalist, materialist philosophy which developed during the Enlightenment era. So I had always assumed that the witch hunt stopped when people realised that witches didn't exist. But actually, that's not true. There was never a moment where somebody wrote a paper, was like, I've proved the witches didn't exist, and ran out into the street. It was like, oh my god, we need to stop burning all the witches. That never happened. Never happened at all. People did eventually realise that witches didn't exist, but you had people like Descartes who was like, I don't know whether witches exist, and crucially, you had people like Thomas Hobbes saying, oh, well, maybe witches don't exist, but the witch hunts serve an important social function. Which is to say, the pointless murder of hundreds of thousands of women, and some men, serves an important social function. The witch hunts didn't stop because people realised witches didn't exist. The witch hunts stopped because they fulfilled their purpose. Because people became accustomed to this new order, and the magical thinking was so prevalent before, it was smashed so thoroughly that it didn't need to be done anymore. Charges of witchcraft were gradually replaced with the stuff that they were always there to hide anyway, so it was replaced with charges of like vagabondage, basically being poor in public, begging, petty theft, cursing. These were the charges that replaced the umbrella term of witchcraft. The final sentence of the book absolutely sums it up. It's fantastic. As soon as we strip the persecution of witches from its metaphysical trappings, we recognise in it phenomena that are very close to home. This book is absolutely brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. I cannot recommend it strongly enough. I'm going to put a link to all 3 of these books in the doobly-doo. This is one of the strongest recommendations I've ever given. I think it's the only time in recent memory that I can think of where I've unqualified recommended all 3 books. Go and get them. They're brilliant. Go and wish Hannah Witness speedy recovery, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye!